Q, you're here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We've got about 4 more minutes before we go live. Please type in your questions on the question icon, or raise your hand if you have any issues, or get in touch with a member of our team. Hi, everyone. We are recording this, so anyone that wants a on-demand copy, this will be available to you directly. So we have about 3 more minutes. Okay, just bear with me.
Sam, you are muted.
Sorry, for those individuals that have come through directly through our direct link, just please add your name while you're coming online. I think I'm good to start. Mark? Mark? Okay, we're just waiting for Mark and Q.
I'm here.
All right, we're here. Okay, great, we start. Okay. Thank you everyone for allocating your evening to join our live webinar. This is going to be a bit about an open discussion in terms of the deadline and how you can file before 11th of March. I guess, you know, we're quite privileged to obviously have here Mark Davies, the Managing Director of Davies and Associates. And then we have Chandres. I won't pronounce the full name because I get it right or I get it wrong every time. The Managing Director for American Immigration Group. I know we had a webinar last week and we was advising everyone to file as soon as possible. And we've had some updates, and you know, with these updates, we decided to have a webinar to kind of inform you and give you an update in terms of what's happening in terms of EB5 and potential filing before the 11th. So, Mark, I guess we can start off with you. You know, the deadline was the 18th of Feb. It's been extended. Why is that, and what does that mean for investors?
Well, there was never a deadline really for EB5, Sam, for February. What was happening is that people were hoping that the reauthorization of the regional center program would be essentially done in symbiosis with certain federal financing. And that was due sort of in February. That's now been kicked to March the 11th. And I would say that there is a very high level of positivity that when that federal financing work is or bill is addressed on March the 11th, that reauthorization of the EB5 regional center program will be attached to that. Now, everything that I have seen contemplates an immediate price increase, which is, I think, you know, what people are interested in. So no one can say with certainty what will happen on March the 11th. It seems at this time that there's a feeling that it's very highly likely that the regional center program will be reauthorized. And if that happens, it's likely that there's a almost immediate price increase. The two numbers I've seen are 700 and 850,000. So, you know, could be between those two things. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So what does it mean for the investors? Because currently it's at 500. Is that correct?
Well, remember there are two levels of investment required with EB5, right? So if the project is in a target economic area or a rural area, which are fancy ways of saying an area of high unemployment or an area of low population density, the project's in one of those two things, the required investment is currently $500,000. If it's not in one of those two areas, the required investment's $1 million. So, you know, that's where we currently are. So most of the projects you see in the market are qualified at the $500,000 level. The other thing to remember is if reauthorization comes, those definitions may change. So it also may become more difficult to find a project at the qualified lower investment level.
Okay, I think this is where we've been addressing in terms of the projects that you have that are $500,000.
Right, see, when the guidelines changed back in 2019, the definition of a targeted economic area or employment area, basically definition stays the same, but the way to get that letter, right, the guidelines to get that letter or what was considered a TEA was way different, and it was much harder to get a TEA in, you know, locations such as Manhattan.
Just to be clear, a TEA is the area of high unemployment, correct?
Right. So a TEA is an area where unemployment is 150% of a national average. However, at the moment, the TEAs, basically we're back to the old guidelines, right? The TEAs are issued by states. Each state issue TEAs for a project for their own state. And when you leave it to the states, they of course are going to want more development, this, that, and the other. So it's a little bit more lenient compared to back in 2019, right? You can attach more census tracts from all directions. It's just more lenient, so that you can include a wider area on a TEA, versus back in 2019 when legislation changed. It was much harder to get this TA. There were certain rules that you could use only a census tract that was like attached to you, right next to you, and so on and so forth. So it was much harder to get, because again, we tried to get these projects in good areas, right? Because we want them to be successful. We want them in urban areas. Like, for example, right now for our veterinarian project, our 4 locations are in Manhattan, and they're all TA. We got the TA letters. So this might change once we get the new legislation. Same with the Great Greek locations. They are in really good locations in areas where they're highly residential, but we were able to get these TA letters. They're considered TAs because of the way that TAs are designated right now. But again, if we were back to the legislations in 2019, we wouldn't have been able to get these TAs for these locations that we have right now. So that's another potential problem when it comes to really finding a good business if legislation changes and if they do change the guidelines of the TEA, which is only one of the guidelines that they're considering changing. And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, there's quite a few things in there with the new bills that have been introduced to change about EB5. And most of them are oversight, which is good. It's good for the investors. It's more oversight on the regional centers. And that's really good. It's something that the industry needs. However, TA and the price might actually not work as well for the investor once those bills come to pass.
Right. I mean, we don't know, Q, as you know, there's 2 possible bills sort of in the offering right now, and the terms of those vary. So I started out by saying I've seen numbers for price increase varying from 700,000 to 850. And it's because there's 2 different bills out there right now. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen on March 11th, as I said. All we do know is that you can file a case today at $500,000. The only thing we know for 100% certain is if you file a case today, it's $500,000. What will happen after March the 11th? Nobody knows. Again, there seems to be a high degree of comfort that the regional center program will reauthorize on March the 11th. And when it does so, as the legislation is currently drafted, there will be an immediate price increase. So
well, let's talk about this bill for a second, Mark. And I think it will give a little bit more clarity to our clients, and especially to some of them who we've been working with for a while. This finance bill has to pass, right? It has to pass at some point. It might, it seems like it is in March 11. It seemed like it was in February 18, right? But it has to pass eventually because that's how the US government gets funded. And the EB5 bill is basically attached to that. So sometimes the US government might not go and discuss things one by one, It's a finance bill. They pass the bill to keep the government running so that we avoid a government shutdown. Am I correct on this, Mark? Do you have anything to add?
right, but exactly. They could pass a continuing finance resolution with nothing to do with EB5 attached to it, right? So we don't, as I said, that's true, but we don't really know. All we know for certain is that if you want to file a case and you file it today, it's $500,000. It seems that after
Here,
March,
let me please, I want for 1 second to switch the gears and just think in terms of like if I was an investor, right? So these deadlines, right? You've got December 3rd. And I would be like, okay, let me see what happens on December 3rd. And then I got February 18th. So I'm starting to, it's the end of year celebrities, all of that stuff. Fine, January, let me start working on this, right? So if you're starting to look at this, you have a February 18th deadline, you might not get ready because as we know, a lot of things have to happen. And one of these most important things is, working on your source of funds, having your source of funds prepared. But a lot of people that I've spoken with were like, I don't want to commit to that. I don't want to pay that attorney because if EB5 changes and the price increases, I can't afford EB5 at that new price. Therefore, I'm wasting my money, which is right. And now February 18, March 11, you have another window. Realistically speaking, can people get ready to file? Let's say they picked the project, because again, I see here names that have decided to go into one of the projects, have decided to do EB5. I just want, like, realistically speaking, is this enough time for that person to actually finish their source of funds? What do you advise? What do you suggest?
What I think is this, Q, is that could a source of funds done between now and March the 11th? Maybe. It depends upon the circumstances. So I agree with you. There are people who are saying, well, we'll wait and see what happens to March the 11th. That's okay, as long as you're willing to pay another, $200,000 to $400,000, your price will go up. You won't if you decide on March the 11th, and as is very likely there's a price increase, then deferring your source of funds is a decision to invest at 700,000 or 850 instead of 500. If you want to invest at 500,000 and you think there's likely to be a price increase on March the 11th, you only have one choice, which is to start your source of funds today. And I understand any law firm is going to charge you about $5,000 to $10,000, depends who they are, for source of funds and exactly what they're doing. But you can choose to pay that fee to somebody today, in which case you sort of lock in the $500,000, or you cannot pay it, in which case you're deciding, if everyone's right, you're deciding to do EB5 at 700,000 or 850. So deferring that is going to cost you another 200,000 plus. Deciding not to do your source of funds is likely to cost you an extra 200,000 plus.
So Mark, if I'm an Indian and I decide to file after March the 11th, because there's already pending petitions out there, does that increase my time frame in getting my I-5 to 6? What happens then? Am I back of the queue?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not quite sure what's going to happen in this area, Sam. There is a body of thought out there. It's not in black and white, that direct EB5 cases may continue for various reasons to have priority. So it's possible that if you file a direct EB5 case today, then you continue to have priority, even if the regional center program reauthorizes. However, there are old regional center filings with the cases that have been on hold now for a while. So, the argument is, if that program restarts, then a case you file today, may have to go into the back of the, behind some of those other cases. So processing may take a while. Well, there's two comments to that. The first one is, once a case gets to be 2 years old, I don't care whether it's regional center or direct, there's a thing called a writ of mandamus that can be used to push the US government to make a decision. So that's the first point. So far, there's no guarantee with one of those things, but so far, the cases that we filed have resulted in the US government expediting the favorable adjudication. Now, it just causes the US government to expedite adjudication, underline adjudication. The cases we've had, they've all been approved, but it doesn't have to be the case. They'll just adjudicate them. So that's the first point. There's something you can do. The second point is what I just mentioned. I have seen this argument that direct cases should now have priority. And I've heard from other people that USCIS sort of has, what's the right word, has some tolerance for that argument. So maybe not. There's certainly nothing sort of cast in stone around that. But that's sort of the points I'd make is, yes, it could be true that there's a line. However, one, once you hit 2 years, there's something you can do about it anyway. And two, there is this argument that direct cases continue to have priority.
Okay, so
And it would make sense if they had priority, because about more than 90% of cases are regional center cases, right? So direct, even if everyone were to do direct, is just not sufficient project. You can't come up with sufficient right projects, right? Good projects to actually accommodate everyone. Because these projects tend to be small businesses, so you can't accommodate everyone. It's not like in a regional center where you can put 200-300 people in one project.
Yeah.
So, majority of filings are regional center. And I think if they did give priority to direct, it wouldn't affect that much the timeline for the regional center. Plainly because of the numbers, right? How many people do regional center?
I do just want to make sure it's on the record that I did not say that direct cases will get priority. I did not say that.
We're not saying that. We said it's a possibility.
I've heard that argument, and I've also been told that USCIS have some tolerance for that argument. That's what I said. So this is sort of a developing watch this space area. Unfortunately, it comes back to the same thing. If you don't file a case, if you don't start work on your case today, you're not filing at $500,000 if the price goes up on March the 11th, or if you don't start your case, probably this week at the very, very latest, you will not be filing at $500,000 come March the 11th.
And Mark, let me ask you this: what is your feeling? And I mean, I know you're an attorney; you're not supposed to have feelings, but
thank you, Keith.
are very emotional indeed.
What is your feeling towards this March 11? Is it going to be just another extension? Is it going to be a real, passing of a new bill? What do you think?
To be honest, Q, I don't have a feeling because I'm not politically connected. However, I know a lot of people who are very politically connected in this industry, and at no point in the last since this program lapsed, at no point has everybody in the industry agreed that things are going to come back until now, right? There's always been some very connected political person saying, nah, it's not going to happen. And in fact, there's one person I know who, is very politically connected in DC, who's always said from day one that this program ain't coming back until February or March of this year. So far, that person has been correct. So I don't know anyone in the industry who's saying that the program is unlikely to come back on March the 11th. So for the first time, we're seeing everybody aligned saying, all the political forces are aligned saying this program's going to come back to March the 11th. So I don't have a personal feeling, Q, but I talk to a lot of people. I talk to the owners of a lot of the big regional centers. And so I get, they have powerful lobbying groups. I listen to what some of the industry associations lobbyists are saying. And, I've heard language of it's 95% certain to come back on March 11th. No, 95% is not 100%, but 95% is, it's pretty, for someone to say that's, a lobbyist or politically connected, that's a pretty strong statement.
Right, and again, the only reason why it wouldn't happen is if Congress passed another continuing resolution in terms of the finance bill. So if they extended like they did now in February, which also seems not so likely because the government has to be funded, right? And this bill is going to pass eventually. So you're better off really just going through the process, getting ready, and just filing your case. The sooner you file, your priority date is sooner too.
Let's talk about this, because we have someone here saying they want to invest the $500,000 in a few weeks' time. And what are actually the steps of filing? What do they need to do?
Well, it depends. There are three things that need to be done.
Okay.
I take that back. There are 2 or 3 things. It depends where you're from.
Okay.
From some people, there's 2 things to be done. For others, there's 3. So let me tell you what these things are. The first is you have to document where your money came from. Every client I've ever had has said, my money's white, that's easy. It's never easy, and it always takes weeks. So as I said, everyone says, my money's white, so this isn't an issue. What they don't understand is when your case is filed, if included with your case is not the documentation that proves that, your case will get rejected or denied. They changed the regulations on this about 1.5 years ago. If it's not there when filed, your case will be denied or possibly rejected. That's the rule. It exists. So there won't be time. You can't file a case on March the 10th, right? You can't say on March the 10th, we know it's going to happen on March 11th, I'm going to file. Not possible, because you've got to put all the paperwork in with the filing that proves the funds. And if you don't, then it's the rule that your case will be denied. End of story, right?
Okay.
So
Or they might just reject it altogether because you have no sufficient documentation.
Exactly. So that's the first point. Where did the money chasing where it came from? The second point is for investors from some countries, the American government has gotten very more focused on than it used to be, very more focused on that the money was legally transferred. So if I'm in London right now, if you're in the UK, you don't have this issue because there's no currency restrictions on sending money out of the UK. If you're from India or you're from Vietnam or you're from some other countries, there are restrictions on the way to move money. So in India, our firm has Indian lawyers who structure this properly. If you don't structure it properly, or you go to your local firm of Gidar and Gidar in Surat or something, who don't know what they're doing, you will risk having your I-526 may get approved by USCIS, but the consulate are likely to refuse to issue the visa. And remember, here's the thing to remember, that if you invest in a project as a partner, you're likely to get a K-1 issued by the US IRS, which is a tax information. Under the sharing protocol, it's my understanding that if you're an Indian resident, the US government will also share that with the Indian Income Tax Authority. So if the Indian Income Tax Authority get a notification from the US government that you have an investment, they're going to say, why haven't you filed an Indian tax return reflecting this investment? So it needs to be done properly, and it needs to be done in a way that you can put it in on your Indian income tax return and properly declare it. So anyway, the point is, for everybody, source of funds. For investors from currency restricted countries, you've got to prove that the money was properly transferred or properly transferred. Third, you've got to do project due diligence, right? Whatever project comes up, you've got to take a good look at it. And there's two kinds of law firms in this context. Sam and I were talking about this earlier. There's one is a firm that will just fill in your Form I-526. Some law firms, I won't say who, but we were looking at a firm this morning that charges $13,500 basically for filling in form for I-526 for you, which to me is grossly exorbitant. Well, there's another kind of firm that will also look at the project. Now, Q's got good projects, so why do you care about a law firm looking at the project? You've decided on Q's project anyway, so why do you care? Well, it's a good project, but with any business in the world, things can happen. If a law firm examines a project and gives you an opinion that they don't see any legal issues in it, and then a legal issue comes up that causes you a problem, the law firm is liable for it. So why you care about it is because it gives you this sort of limited form of insurance, point one. Point two is you also want somebody championing your side. You're going to be in this project for 5 or 6 years, helping you with just watching the project and what's going on and working with the project operator. So those three things need to happen. One is proper project due diligence, which is what I just talked about, which, two is you've got to get that source of funds ready. And three, for limited investors from certain countries, we've got to plan how the money gets moved. So those are the three things that need to happen before Form I-526, which is the form you file to initiate an EB-5, can be filed.
So what I've got here, Mark, is one, source of funds, getting the documents for your funds. Number two, because we do know in certain jurisdictions, it can take a couple of weeks for that money to be transferred from that country to the project or the US. And then number three, which was what we did a few comparison to is on the project due diligence. We know Q's projects are strong and solid. However,
right.
there is insurance that your firm covers. Can you explain a bit more, Mark, on that? Because this was quite interesting, like what your firm does to be on that journey with the
Right.
investor.
Well, this is pretty standard stuff, actually, Sam. So if you look at, name the law firm, any of America's top 10 law firms, you're going to find they have an entire department of lawyers who do project due diligence for their clients. And that's got nothing to do with immigration. So they're looking at a project to make sure, for example, that the entity that clients are investing into is in legal good standing in the applicable state. They're looking to make sure that the people who say that they have a lease actually really do have a lease or really do own the land. They're looking for sort of basic things like that. So if you hire an immigration only firm, they won't do any of those things, right? They won't do that work because you're not engaging them to do that work. A firm that is looking from a legal perspective at a project will look at those issues. Now, what happens, for example, I know this is not the case with Q's project. What happens, just to take the simple example, if Q's business is not, that we're investing into, has an entity that's not in good standing, well, that could cause a problem with your EB5 approval, but that could cause all kinds of issues of their ability to enter into contract, different things, right? So it's a basic piece of due diligence. If I'm a law firm taking on responsibility for that, and I don't check that, and I miss that Q hasn't done what she needs to in that context, I'm liable for that. So there you can come and say, Mark, because Q's business is not in good standing and you didn't check it properly, guess what? You're liable and I'm coming after you. And then, you care about this. And lots of law firms won't have enough money to cover those losses. So a law firm has professional malpractice insurance. So my insurer says, basically, Mark, we know you're an experienced person at this kind of work, so we will insure you. So if you say to a client that Q's company is good to invest in from a legal perspective, and it's not, then we will cover those losses. So that's sort of how this works. So when you look at a law firm, you need to look at what's the scope. The most important thing when you look at a law firm and the work they're going to be doing for you is that there's always a paragraph there called the scope of services. So the scope of services paragraph will tell you what the law firm's going to do or not going to do. Mostly in this industry, it basically says, we're going to fill in form for I-526 for you, and that's it. Some of them might do source of funds as well, right? Others of them, probably people will look at the project from an immigration compliance perspective. Make sure that the project, that law firm really thinks that if you invest in the project, it qualifies properly for EB5. Almost all law firms will certainly do that. What a lot of them won't do is, next question would be, never been a problem with Q's project. So imagine it wasn't Q's project. Imagine it was, for example, the Hudson Yards project in New York, which we warned clients about in certain ways. That project became issues, right? If you call up, I could name the firm, this is a real client. They call up their law firm and say, help me, project's in difficulties. Basically, the law firm says, get stuffed. We didn't cover that in our agreement. We're immigration only, you're on your own. Or the other kind of law firm, client calls up and the firm says, yes, we'll work through you with this, and here's what you need to do, here's the next steps. So that's a real sort of example.
So that's great, Mark. So now we know, look, we're working towards 11th of March. We know you've given us a very good insight in terms of what your firm does to protect the investor. Now, during that interim, I guess Q, they're going to really want to work with you in terms of the project. So what can you do to help them to get everything done on time?
Well, there's a couple of things that we do. One, we can help you through the entire process. Like we can hold your hand through the entire process. But the most important thing that you need to do is to understand, where are you investing, right? Where is your money going? First, so there is two main goals here, right? First goal is get your EB5, right? You get your green card. You need to make sure that project qualifies for that green card, right? That's the main idea. That's why this whole industry exists. Second is, am I investing in a good investment opportunity? So you need to really understand this, and you need to talk to us, and we need to explain things to you, and you need to read the materials, and you need to ask questions. A lot of people might find something they don't like, and they don't really understand the legality that goes behind it, and never come back with questions. Just come back with questions. Just ask for clarity on anything that you don't understand, or that seems unreasonable to you, or that seems whatever it is. It is important to come back and ask questions. It is important to get clarity on those issues. It is important, if you have a financial advisor, to discuss it with them. You know, you need to do your due diligence, and we will help you through that due diligence in the project side. We'll answer all your questions. We'll send you all the documentation. We're completely transparent when it comes to our projects. We'll send you anything you ask for. But you need to be involved in that, right? You need to ask questions, because we might not be able to think of every potential questions that you have and answer them in advance. So you need to read those documents. You need to really pay attention to what you're investing. It's very important.
Let me just interject on there, because a lot of people are going to get these documents, and
Right.
they don't have an understanding why these documents are created for immigration purposes.
Mhm.
So sometimes, because this is the first time they're filing for I-526 or doing an EB-5. So there's the documents that you've put forward to the investor. Not of them are very familiar with the terms that you're using. So,
Right.
yes. So that's
Right, and that is why I'm stressing this point,
Yes.
as you need to come back and ask, because these documents are written by attorneys, securities attorneys and immigration attorneys, and there are terms that are necessary to be there. It's necessary for those terms to be there. So, and I don't expect you to understand them. I don't expect even a person that was born and raised in America to understand those things. So you need to come back and ask questions and get clarity on those things. What are they? What's the purpose? Why are you doing it this way? It's important, because in that case, even if it's not my project, right? It's someone else's project. If you're having that discussion, if you're asking those questions, you actually understand much more about that project than what you could understand from the paper. And that's important, because you need to know where your money is going. At the end of the day, you want your money back, right? You want to be in a business that's going to be able to afford to pay you out, to pay you back if that's your choice. So you want to do some due diligence on that. We start the process with a pre-subscription and questionnaire before anything. You need to fill that out. We need to clear you as a suitable investor, and then we move forward with the other documentation. But again, it is very important that you stay in touch. It is very important that you ask questions so that you understand exactly where you're going. And while asking these questions, you also might find with different projects that there is a problem, or that things are not just as you see in a brochure. It's important to do your due diligence.
But Q, as an investor, I'm going to get documents from American Immigration Group. I want to have a third party to look at this and to reconfirm what you've answered, or the answers that you supplied to the questions. Can a law firm also be involved in giving a second opinion? Like, for example, Mark's firm. Mark, if there's documents that are submitted by American Immigration Group, should the investor also be asking you as their attorney if you're retained?
Right.
Mark?
I mean, you certainly can. Sam, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, go ahead.
Right. So, the role of your attorney is supposed to be independent. So one of the biggest problems I see in EB5 is this structure where you approach a project or a regional center or a direct project arranger, and they basically say, and these projects exist, you can invest in the project, but you must use attorney X, or attorney X won't share the documents with anyone else. That's really happening today. That's a huge conflict of interest, huge conflict of interest. So, first point is one, anyone on this conference call, if you invest with Q, you don't have to use my firm as an immigration firm. You can use whoever you want, right? Now,
Right, absolutely.
Q has an interest in making sure you use a competent firm because she doesn't want filings in her case that are messed up. So Q is going to want to make sure you use a firm that's competent. But other than that, she doesn't really care which law firm you use, right? Now, some of these project operators, basically the law firm has financial skin in the game. And so they will try to force you to use a particular lawyer. Why is that relevant to the question that Sam asked? It's relevant because if I'm the lawyer that wrote Q's documents and I really represent Q, right? And an investor gives me a document to review and says, is this good or bad? Well, I wrote the document because I wrote it for Q. So I'm looking at a document I wrote myself, an investor saying, is this good or bad? That's ridiculous, right? So you want like whoever wrote Q's documents, you want Mark to review it and to say, yes, I think this is good, or I think this is bad. And if, well, you probably won't say it's bad. No lawyer is going to do that. But what they will say is, here's issues I see in this document, right? They're not going to say it's a bad document, but they will say, here's issues I see in this document, so that you know and you're appraised of the issue. If I also represent Q, there's a huge conflict of interest, right? And I may even have written the documents. So be very, very careful of this. There are projects in the market where they will, and there are projects in the market where they say, we will only give the documents to attorney Y and nobody else. Well, think about why they're doing that, because there's probably big issues in it and they don't want an independent lawyer reviewing those documents to look at it. So again, Sam's 100% right. Your lawyer should be reviewing things for you. And bluntly, there's a major reason why you want an independent lawyer to move things for you or can't review things for you, because the lawyer is then liable, right? If Q gives you, I don't know, gives Mohammed, let's make up an investor called Mohammed Investor. If Q gives Mohammed Investor a document and Mohammed Investor gives it to Mark to review and says, Mohammed, I've reviewed this document, everything's fine, no problem. And then it turns out there's a major issue in it. Guess what? Because Mark reviewed it, Mark's liable. It's not just Q that's got the problem, because Q may have a problem in her document and you can do whatever you want to with Q. But guess what? Mark's liable too. And it's a heck of a lot easier to get a distribute. If a lawyer's messed up, it's a lot easier to sometimes to get to, you want to, lawyers make sure your lawyer has malpractice insurance. As long as your lawyer is properly insured, that gives you another avenue to do something about it. So Sam's absolutely right. Run everything by your lawyer, not just because you like and trust your lawyer. There's two aspects to this. First, your lawyer may stop you making a mistake, and no one wants to make a mistake. But secondly, if there is a mistake, then your lawyer, as well as perhaps Q, may be liable for that mistake.
So Mark, you've raised a very important, so we've got this dilemma where there's potentially a conflict of interest. If someone's done the documentation, they, then they appoint someone. You've just highlighted, if they've done the documentation for the project and they've hired the same firm, and in the terms we use over here is called conflict of interest. But sometimes you have investors that will say, well, you've done the documentation for this project, so it's good. So does it not make sense for you to file the petition?
Listen, Sam, I'm sorry. Let me just interject here just a second. It doesn't matter. If you feel comfortable with the attorney that wrote the documentation, go with the attorney that wrote the documentation. If you don't, and you're of the different, it's like two schools of thought, right? It's philosophy. It depends on the person. What the problem here is that a project cannot obligate you to go with a certain attorney just so you can be in their project. A project has to leave the immigration attorney up to you, because you're going to be represented by the immigration attorney, you as an individual, and you want to make sure that that attorney is going to look after your interests in one way or another. It doesn't matter. Attorneys that write documentation.
I disagree on this, because if you hire a lawyer to write your documents, they represent you. And if something goes wrong, they can't, and they represent an investor, they can't turn around and sue you because they're your lawyers. So there is an irreconcilable conflict of interest with a law firm.
Right. What I'm trying, and that's an opinion that most of our investors have. But however, I have seen investors who say they wrote the documentation, I feel more comfortable with that. I have seen that. My job, mine, to be clear, I cannot force you to go with that attorney that wrote my documents, or any other attorney for that matter. If you ask me, Q, can you refer in a good immigration attorney? I will give you references. You choose who you want to represent you. I will disclose, if I introduce the immigration attorney that wrote our documents, I will disclose that to you. And I will tell you, this is an immigration attorney that wrote our documents. However, if you want to be introduced to them, I can. It's just, it's a matter of the project not forcing you to go with a specific attorney. It can't. That's just not right. You know, it's not right to be forced to go with a specific attorney, because, you know, our documentation should be available to every attorney that represents a client that is interested to come to us.
So let's move on and focus on the investors here in terms of what they need to do. As you know, we're talking about 11th of March, and Mark's given quite a few good steps and outlines to the investors in what they need to do. And Mark, you know, I know we had a long discussion on the last week on the webinar about source of funds. How quickly can your firm turn things around, and how quickly can Q project turn things around to get the petitions done if we're working on this 11th?
That's going to depend upon the individual investor and their circumstances. So, you know, unfortunately, there are probably some people listening on your webinar where it's just too late, right? That it's not going to be possible by March the 11th. So it depends upon your individual circumstances. So you know, we will look for free at no cost. I'm happy to talk with anyone on this phone, on this course, excuse me, through their individual circumstances, and can probably tell you pretty quickly whether it's realistic to do something by March the 11th. But, you know, unfortunately for some people, it's not going to be possible to do that in a competent manner. Why? Because we're going to need documentation that sometimes that requires more than a week to produce. So again, you know, I don't know. You know, if you're listening to this, I don't know whether it's possible to file your case by March the 11th. What I do know is if you want to set up a time, Sam can arrange that, and we'll talk complimentary, no fee, and we'll talk about your case and your circumstances, and then we will be able to give you a realistic idea whether it's possible to get you ready to potentially file on March the 11th or not.
That's right. And if you, I mean, most of you here that I see already know about our projects and already have received business plans, and they're going through that. So, you know, you want to learn about the project. In terms of our documentation, we can turn around pretty quickly, because at the end of the day, you just have to sign, and then you have to wire the funds. How long it takes you to really understand the project, to understand this investment opportunity, that is up to you, right? But when it comes to our documentation, the process is much simpler than, you know, your source of funds. So again, highly recommend go with your source of funds, finish your source of funds. That's the main point here.
Okay. So if I've got a complex documentations of source of funds, and what would be the best advice? You know, because I do want to file as an investor before 11th of March. What would you advise?
Best advice would be start today. When there is no other advice, you know, like set up a call with Mark. Tell him your financial situation. I got this money from here. I got that money from here. I can give this document, this. Ask. Mark is going to ask you questions. Answer those questions, and Mark is going to tell you if it's doable or not. It's just as simple as that. There's just no way for us to generalize source of funds, because I've seen right, and Mark can attest to this. We've seen people who had all their documents ready for some reason. They were able to turn it around in a week. We've seen people that took like 4 or 6 months to do it. So we can't generalize this.
The other thing, Q, which, you know, you probably won't want me to, but the other thing is, you know, I'm talking about legal issues in a project. you know, you need to consider, if you're going to invest in a project, do you want an independent financial advisor to look at it? I cannot advise you on financial issues. So, you know, for example, if you're just building a simple building, right, and you say there's going to be a tenant in the building, then legal issue is that lease legally enforceable? That lease where there's going to be a tenant in the building, right, once it's built, is that a legal document that's legally enforceable? And is it a reasonable lease that really ties the tenant? Those are legal questions I can look at. However, the issue of, does the rent make sense? Is the building going to make money? Those are financial issues. And if you want to have a licensed financial advisor look at those issues, you probably want to line one of those up too. The only comment I would make is a lot of the brokers in this industry, you know, are not really independent. They're getting sales commissions. I would look for a CFA or an RFA. If I was investing in EB5 myself, I would look for someone who's a CFA. They'd have to have a license too. You know, just having a C and or an RFA, someone who's got one of those two qualifications to be my independent financial advisor. And then I'd also have a lawyer who knows not just immigration, but who really knows the business of representing investors in projects.
Right. So again, you really need to start working on it. If it's something you want to do, you need to start working on it. Okay. So you can do these two things simultaneously. Now, when it comes to our projects, we have shared our documentations with several attorneys. So if you ask me, Hugh, can you refer me to attorneys? I will refer you to attorneys that we know, to attorneys that we believe they are good on their filings. We, you know, have a good experience with our investors in them. So, you know,
let's talk about your project, because, you know, a lot of people are saying, you know, the returns are too good to be true. You know, and I did have this conversation with you. I'm like, a lot of people, you know, why
again, why these returns? This is like the question I'm always asked. Here's the deal. Everyone has been used to the regional center setup. You have to understand, direct EB5 is a different structure. Regional center EB5 is a different structure, right? Regional center is done in a grand scale. It makes different economic sense than a direct project, right? So you can make revenue on, like, you know, sheer volume. So everyone got used to 0.25 to 1% return, 3 the most, and 3 was completely out of ordinary. And yes, a lot of people, when the industry has been hammering this point that high returns means the project is not good. In regional center, I tend to agree with that. In regional center projects. Now, again, no one can tell you a project is good or bad without seeing the documentation. You know, that's just an opinion. So I tend to agree with higher returns constitute higher risks in the regional center structure of things. So as we have seen, we've always stayed under the 1% on the regional center projects. Now, direct EB5 is different. It's a different structure. And these projected returns are based on, you know, financials that we've reviewed of other businesses. For example, if we talk about the Great Greek, they have 22 locations already open. We were able to review those things. If we're talking about the veterinarian clinics, we have 2 chief medical veterinarians. Not only we got financial information from industry, we also had those financial informations, you know, like vetted by these 2 veterinarians who have their own practices and their own, you know, clinics, and they know how much you can make, prices of things. All of this stuff was put through them. So you look at a business, and what we thought about was, all right, this is direct EB5. We're not kind of tied up by different rules or different structures of the regional center program. So let's find businesses that could be profitable and that, you know, could do well. and also qualify for EB5. So if you look into the grand scheme of things, you know, these returns, yes, might be higher than whatever else is out there in the market, right? But it's a fair offer. It's a fair offer to the investor who's put in the money into these projects. And we want you to do well. We want you to be happy with your investment. We have budgeted things in a way where we can have an exit strategy as well. So, you know, you're going to invest in it. I can afford to give you those returns. Why not? That's basically the point of it.
When do you pay out? That's one of the questions from one of the investors.
So the paying out, basically, we're talking about, it takes about 4 to 6 months to basically construct a location with the designs and all of that stuff and open the doors. And then usually takes, you have to, conservatively speaking, you have to give 6 months to a business to stabilize, right? Now, if, you know, that the great Greek restaurants, from what we've seen on the other ones, they basically broke even in 2 months. However, you want to be conservative. But as soon as the project starts making money, you're being distributed your share of it because you're a partner on it. So, you know, as we, you get money every 6 months, basically every 6 months. We look at the profits of the business and we distribute the profits to owners. It's just as simple as that.
Okay, so I have Mark's pushed, not pushed, Mark's advised in terms of speaking, doing a free consultation with an attorney. So I have a question here. Is there a specific checklist an investor should have before they have a conversation with an attorney? And we know, Mark, you're quite adverse to this. There's a limit on transferring funds from India in a financial year. Does this delay or possibly get a rejection? And how soon the process gets completed, or which one is better if we look at prospective chance of getting successful EB5, either direct or regional center? So there's quite a few questions here, but perhaps Q, you can advise what should be an investor's checklist before they speak to an attorney. And then Mark can elaborate on transferring of funds and the limitations that they have in India.
What would be a what? I'm sorry?
A checklist.
A checklist?
Yes. Well, so what should they be asking before, you know, they speak to Mark or any other legal attorney? I don't know if you can see that from Jacob on the questions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's on the chat. Oh, hi, Jacob. So is there a checklist? What I usually advise is, first of all, make sure that attorney knows laws and legislations of the area where you were from, right? Wherever you're from, make sure they have some sort of experience in that region, right? That they understand the complexities or the legalities of what needs to be done in your home country so you don't get in trouble there either, right? That's one. Two, look at their track record, make sure that they have approvals, you know, make sure that they've been in the industry, and also make sure that they're responsive to you, because you do want your attorney to answer your questions and you want your attorney to be there for you. So that's what I suggest you to do. However, it is you who's going to speak to that attorney. It is you who's going to ask those questions. The attorneys that I refer investors to are basically, I'm happy with them. And that's why I refer them to you. But if you were to just go outside of who I refer, just ask those questions. Make sure they know, you know, they know or they've been faced with a similar situation that you are.
Good. I'll also ask, like, they should have someone that knows the local jurisdiction. That really makes it a big difference. If they have someone on the ground, that really does help with an attorney. But Mark, going back to transferring of funds, you know, you did outline this on the last webinar. Could you just expand a bit more on the restrictions in certain jurisdictions, for example, in India? What's the limitations they have per year, and how do you overcome such limitations?
So first of all, right, I'm not an Indian lawyer, so you know what I tell you is the experience we've had with cases over the years. We do have Indian lawyers with our firm.
I've got you wrong all the time. I thought you was an Indian lawyer. Apologies. No, I'm joking. Sorry. Go on.
So generally, right, there is a limit of, from India specifically, of being able to send out $250,000 in one Indian financial year. That is generally the rule. What we see is that a solution to that potentially is for multiple members of the same family to send 250. Now, where my advice from Indian professionals is that people fall down is, let's say Mr. Singh and Mrs. Singh both send $250,000 directly to a regional center account that's titled in the name of Mr. Singh. That's illegal. The US consulate in Mumbai is certainly declining cases for people who have done that. So that's a problem. So what's the solution? The solution is there are ways to do this. So for example, with our clients, I'll tell you, what we do, our secret sauce, so to speak, is we set up a joint account in New York in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Singh. So if you imagine they both own that account. So then Mr. Singh sends 250,000 to that account and Mrs. Singh sends 250,000 to that account. So they're each allowed to put money in the same account. Well, the next problem is that now you've got in joint account, but Q's needs the money for EB5 purposes in the name of an account that's only in Mr. Singh's name. So then sort of where the real secret sauce on this is taking the money that's now in New York in that joint account and moving it over to Q's account, such that we can get an opinion from a major Indian law firm that that's completely compliant with the Foreign Exchange Management Act. If you don't do it that way, you're taking real risks with two things. You're taking real risks that the Indian Income Tax Department will catch you, and that the Reserve Bank of India will become interested in this. That's the first thing, Indian side risks. The second thing is that, as I told you, I have now seen USCIS NOIDs, Notice of Intent to Deny, and ROFEs based on this issue. So that's the first thing. You may have a problem with USCIS. More likely, the problem will happen once USCIS approve the case and it's in the consulate in Mumbai, and they're increasingly looking at this issue. But the whole thing is silly because with a little bit of careful structuring, right, and perhaps a review from an experienced Indian chartered accountant or Indian law firm, you really can avoid this risk. But it's just been done. If you sign up for an American immigration law firm who basically says husband send 250 to Q, wife send 250 to Q, that's the time you need to change lawyer, because either they should be saying we've got an Indian lawyer who can help you, or they should be saying you need to speak to an expert in India who knows how to do this properly. One of those two things. It doesn't really matter if the law firm can't help you. If they refer you to somebody who really can, that's okay too. But just sending the 250 each out of India directly to a project, that causes really significant problems in some cases. So again, easy solutions to this that won't cost you any extra money, but do it when the case is filed to avoid all the problems, rather than finding out, and it will be 2 to 3 years later, that you've got you've got issues with both the government of India and the government of the United States because nobody bothered to do it properly.
No, thanks for that, Mark. So I've got a lot of questions coming through Facebook as well. So
we have questions here as well, and Sam would like to kind of just run through them because we are running out of time. Yes. And I would like to just address a couple of them really quick.
Okay.
There's how successful EB5, is it more, if I understand this correctly, you're asking if the chances for a successful EB5 are more with direct or regional center. Here is what I have to say about this. It depends on the project. You can have a really good regional center project. You can have a really good direct EB5 project. You can have a really bad regional center project or a really bad direct EB5 project. It depends on the project. It is not about direct or regional center when it comes to you making a decision. It's about the project, right? It's about, does the project comply? Does it create enough jobs? Jobs are calculated differently on a regional center. They're calculated differently on direct. So you want to understand this, and you want to make sure that it complies. It is all about the project. It's not about the program. Do you agree with me on this, Mark?
Yes, I do. I think that it's a big mistake to say that, you know, all regional center projects are inherently better than direct projects, or all direct projects are inherently better than regional center projects.
Right.
You know, they both, yeah, both regional center, there are pluses and minuses to being a regional center project. There are pluses and minuses to being a direct project. But, you know, you could line up two projects, you know, the better project might, you know, could be the regional center project, or it could be the direct project. It depends upon the project.
Correct.
So,
I agree with that.
let's do rapid fire questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna just read the questions really quick here. I am from India, and if I invest $500,000 in a week's time, when am I eligible to live in the USA? So as we were speaking before, the timelines to process this, and we've done this in previous webinars. This webinar is more about, you know, how long it takes to do the source of funds and just get in at the 500,000. But the timelines are pretty, it depends. It takes up to God knows how much, but as Mark said before, at 24 months, so at 2 years, there is an action you can take to get that approval sooner. You get that approval, and then basically you go through consular processing. So worst case scenario, you're kind of looking at, you know, 2.5 years maybe to be able to come to the US with a conditional green card. Do you agree with me? I know there is nuances to this. There's a lot of nuances to this, but we are running out of time. And we've covered these nuances in other webinars. So it's not a straightforward answer, but this is the best I can do right now for you. Please contact us, and we'll go through this with you, and you can contact Mark as well. Please explain from a legal point of view why the investment has to be at risk. Okay, Mark, do you want to take this?
Right, well, that's simply a legal requirement, right? The law requires that your investment must be at risk. However, remember, at risk and risky is not the same thing. So for example, you know, if I put my money in HDFC Bank in India, you might think it's safe. Well, not really. Yes Bank nearly collapsed. Right, what happens if HDFC Bank collapses? Well, if HDFC Bank collapses, I forget what the amount is, but the government of India will guarantee a certain amount of money, but it's a very small amount of money. So the point is, there's nothing that you can do that's riskless, right? We have clients in Ludhiana who seem to keep large amounts of cash for whatever reason. However, you know, point is, nothing is that you can do with your money is 100% safe. There's always some element of risk with anything you can do with your money. So,
but Mark, isn't this an important criteria on the USCIS?
It is a requirement by USCIS. However, I want to touch upon one more thing here. I've had people come to me and say, can we have a side agreement where you guarantee to me that you're going to return my money? And we don't have to show that side agreement to USCIS. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, don't tell your lawyer about it.
Don't tell, you can't tell anyone about it, because at the end of the day, you know, that's just not legal, and we cannot do it. It's just not something that is allowed in EB5. The program,
ethical, like if I knew about that, we would refuse to file your case.
Right,
so
correct.
If you have a responsible ethical lawyer, if they know that there's such, I guess it would depend a little bit on the timing of it and how it's structured. But as a general concept, you know, an ethical, responsible lawyer would refuse to file such a case.
So what would USCIS react towards?
Well, they tell me, let's not show it to USCIS. Let's just have the side agreement between us. So I'm quite interested to know your thought. We always say no, of course. It's just not the right thing to do. That would be apparently they're getting it from somewhere. Can they enforce that if it hasn't been shown?
That would be a fraud on USCIS. And if USCIS found out, you know, the investor likely would be banned from the United States from the rest of their natural life. And Q
Okay.
would may well end up in Club Fed, a little vacation in the
Don't
federal
do
penitentiary.
Right.
That would be a
No, no, they
fraud on the.
apparently are getting it from somewhere.
No,
Someone
is that Club Fed in a TA area or non-TA?
Someone is doing this because they're getting it somewhere. But here is where we talk about the enforceability of a document. Anyone can sign anything. Can you enforce it? If they don't return your money at the end of the day, can you enforce that side agreement that you made? You can, because the moment that you go to enforce it, USCIS is going to find out that you committed fraud. So it doesn't serve you any good at all to have that side agreement. It's worthless. It if anything is going to give you more trouble.
Okay.
Now, the next question: how many slots left? Olu, very few. We need to talk about this very quickly, please. The other one is, if I make my wife main applicant, then can I live in my home country for 6 months? And she lives in India after 6 months. I'm assuming your home country is 6 months, is India? I don't understand this question. Mark, do you understand this?
I think what the question is, Q, is, say for example, if their wife is the main applicant, do they have to stay in the US for minimum 6 months, or how does it impact them?
That's
So,
Mark.
I think the question is this: once I get all the time you've just filed an I-526, there's no obligation to spend any time in America. The question becomes, when somebody has their green card, what is your obligation to be in the United States? I think that's what the question is.
yes.
Right? And the answer to that question is that the law requires you to maintain your residency, but it doesn't define what that means. So this has come up for lots of investors, and lawyers tend to be conservative. So we've advised people to spend larger amounts of time, but we've had clients who have spent, I don't recommend it, I don't think it's appropriate, but we have had clients who have spent as little as a few weeks in America each year, and they've not had any problems. I don't recommend that. I think that's a recipe for disaster, but it remains the fact that there are clients who've done that and they haven't had any problem. So, what is the rule? Well, one of the things that you need to think about is, when you re-enter the United States, when you reach the border, they're going to look at how long have you been outside the country. And those immigration officers are trained to look for people who have been outside the country for more than 6 months. So one of the things you want to think about is, when you arrive at the US border, you probably don't want to have been outside the country for more than 6 months, because that'll trigger an immediate sort of red flag to you. The other thing to think about is, if you do get stopped and questioned, it's famous that they have the right to sort of look at your cell phone, look at your wallet, everything you've got on you, right? So don't have things on you that tell the immigration officer at the border that you don't live in the United States. I'm not saying create false documents at all. I'm just saying, be resident in the United States, but have documentation on your person that evidences the fact that you're resident in the United States. Residency in the United States doesn't have to mean living there. There's a thing called which I'm not a fan of, called a re-entry permit. So a re-entry permit works like this: you go to the United States and you say, well, for whatever reason, I need to be out of the country for more than a year. However, I don't intend to abandon my residency. There's a thing you can apply for called a re-entry permit. And that basically sort of documents and records your sort of intent of not abandoning your residency when you're outside the country for more than a year. So, there's that route. Now, there's problems with that route that's beyond the scope of this discussion. So we should talk about that if that's something of interest to you. But, the big picture is, there is no rule that says you must be in the country for 6 months out of 12.
I think that is the rule if you want citizenship after the 5 years. Is that correct?
That's a different thing. No, it's not the rule, Q. There's no such rule. For citizenship, here is the rule. If you want to become a US citizen, you must have had your green card for 5 years, which includes the conditional green card. For that 5-year period, you must have spent 50% of the time in the United States. So that could mean, again, I'm not saying you do this, I don't recommend it. You spend a month or two each year for the first couple of years, and then you spend all of the last couple of years in America. It's the aggregate for the citizenship purposes. You must have spent an aggregate of 50% of that 5 years period in America. So that means 2.5 years. So in the last 5 years before you apply for citizenship, you must have spent 2.5 of that total 5-year block in the United States. There's an additional rule, which I think is what you're thinking of. The additional rule for citizenship is that 5-year period preemptively restarts if you're outside the country for more than 6 months. So there's no rule for citizenship that says you must be in the country 6 months out of 12. It doesn't exist. But there is a rule that says if you're outside the country for a period exceeding 6 months, that 5-year period presumptively restarts. Now you can rebut that presumption and you can deal with that. If you're outside the country for more than 1 year, there's almost nothing you can do about it. That 5-year period will restart. So for 2 reasons, it's a very good idea not to be outside the country for 2 years. First reason, that officer at the border, if you've been outside more than 6 months, it's going to draw his or her attention. Now, maybe they do nothing about it, maybe, but it's going to draw his or her attention. Second thing is, if you want to be able to apply for US citizenship, don't raise that presumption that the 5-year period restarts. Just come to America for the citizenship purpose. You know, your visit to America could be as much as an overnight stay right at the Marriott Hotel at Newark Airport. And you could leave the next day. That will protect you from the citizenship. That won't help you necessarily maintain your green card, but the citizenship rule, don't be outside the country for a period exceeding 6 months. Is that what you were thinking of, Q?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. Okay, so I think we answered that question. Next one is, if the business goes in loss, does that affect the returns? Yes, it does. If the business makes more money, you make more returns. You're a partner. This is a very clean-cut type of a structure. You're a partner in the business. You know, the well-being of the business will affect your returns. We cannot guarantee your returns or make your returns look like, you know, you're getting the principal back, because you cannot get that principal back until you have reached your sustainability period. So yes, you are connected. Your revenue, you're a partner. You're going to be in the advisory board if you're in one of our projects. So the returns do get affected by the well-being of the business, and that's your returns, our returns, everyone's returns. The other question is, so once the EB5 is successful and after 5-year completion, how much chances are there where we could get back our investment with committed interest or without interest? Okay, so I think this is asking, once the EB5 is successful, so basically you're done your EB5, what are the chances of you getting the money back? Again, it depends on the project. In our projects, I would say very good. That's why I brought these projects into the market. So it depends in the project. The chances are good. I think every project out there, with the exception of some, do plan on giving the money back, do plan on paying the investors out and doing right by them, because at the end of the day, we are in this for the long haul. We don't want to do the wrong thing. This is our business. This is what we do for a living. So, you know, chances are good with my project. Yes, the chances are good.
So
Not
this
guaranteed. Again.
No, so Mark, this is important for an investor. So they see the projects, they see the documents, and there's always an exit strategy. What do you advise and ask them to look into on the project after they've done?
There's 2 aspects to the exit strategy, Sam. Right? There's legal aspects and financial aspects.
Yeah.
So, for example, you know, you could have, you know, you own stock, right? So your ability to get your money back is your ability to sell your stock basically to somebody else. Then there's some of these projects have preference shares. Preference shares attach different rights to them. So there's a legal issue of looking at, you know, what is your position? What are your rights to your money back? Which, you know, that's a legal issue. Then there's a financial issue of, you know, whatever plan is being presented, how financially realistic is it? Lawyer can't help you with that. That's where your independent financial advisor comes in. So a lawyer is basically going to look at your circumstances in each individual project and tell you what are your legal rights to the return of your capital, right? And it might vary a little bit from project to project, the way that that's done. So they're going to tell you, what are the things that you can do to get your money back at the appropriate period from a legal perspective. Financial advisor is going to tell you, right, what they think about how financially successful that project is likely to be, and are they going to be in a financial position to return your capital. So it's one thing, if I have a client, right, and I can tell him, you are legally entitled, unlikely because of EB5 rules, but let's suppose that I tell my client, you're legally entitled to all of your money back, and they're not giving him his money back, so we sue. We go to court, the judge gives us a judgment, and so we go to collect the money. Well, if the project doesn't have the money, all you've done is waste court fees on getting a judgment because it's completely unenforceable. So it needs to be both things. You need to make sure that you're in a good legal position to be able to get your money back. But, if we go to court and we get that judgment, which I'm not, that the project is really going to have the money to be able to give it to you back, right? So put in terms of shares, if I buy stock in a company today at a certain price, and I want to sell it at the same price in 5 years' time, I've got to be able to find a purchaser, and I've got to be able to find someone who's willing to pay me the money back, right? And if the value of the company has changed, it may be hard or difficult to do that. As a lawyer, I can't look at a project and tell you how likely or unlikely those things are to do. That's a financial issue. Does that help?
Yes.
Right. No, that's very clear. And again, just interjecting here in terms of, I can only speak about our projects. You will have a buying out option. You'll have the option to sell your shares back to us at the time when you're done. Again, we can't guarantee anything. It is the way the industry, not the industry, is the way the program works. We can't guarantee it to you. I can't give you a side letter to tell you, I guarantee you I'll buy your shares back. I can't do that. It's not supposed to happen. That could get us all in trouble, you and us both. So please just be understanding that, it's just like any other business. If you open a little store and you buy inventory for that little store, you're putting that money at risk because you don't know, you might not sell anything. Right? That's the risk. But you might have done your homework, looked at the area, seen a real need for that store to be there, and you feel pretty confident that this stuff is going to sell and I'm going to get my money back. So it's the same thing here. The definition of risk is the same thing here, right? You just want to understand why we believe, because we wouldn't bring a project that we didn't believe it's going to do well. Again, our revenue, all the work that we're doing right now, everything that we're doing right now is tied to these projects being successful. So we will do everything in our power to make them successful. We did all our homework to make sure that they will work, that they will be in locations that will work, right? But it's just like any other business. So hopefully you've done your due diligence, you've done your homework, you've asked the questions. You can ask us why we feel comfortable with these locations and with these places, and because again, all of this time that we're putting in goes to waste if these businesses don't do well. So our interests are really aligned with yours. We're standing shoulder to shoulder in these businesses because we make money when you make money. There's just no other way. So yes, you want to just make sure that you understand why things are being done a certain way. And there is no guarantees. You don't ask for a guarantee. Please don't ask for a guarantee. That's just, even if someone gives it to you, it's going to be trouble. You cannot enforce it because it's going to make you more trouble than good. So.
And Hugh, honestly, one of the most important things I think with EB5, and bluntly any sort of investment, is that the people operating the project are trustworthy, law-abiding persons. If someone's willing to enter into these kinds of deals with you, it tells you one thing for sure: they're shady people who are willing to break the law. So you
and I won't take it. I won't take them.
Think about, do you want to invest with somebody who's managing your money, who's a shady person who's willing to break the law?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, that is the law. And also, I have seen all kinds of guarantees out there, all kinds of things out there. But a real guarantee is a guarantee that see, for example, if someone guarantees to you and says, if I have the money, that's not a guarantee. That's not enforceable. A guarantee is, I'll tell you, give me this money for EB5, and in exchange, I'll give you a house, my house, if I can't give you the money. That's a guarantee. That is a guarantee. That's something you can enforce. But again, it's against EB5. You're gonna get in more trouble than good on it. So you really want to stay away from it. Go to USCIS, look at the guidelines. It clearly states your money has to be in risk. You cannot have these types of guarantees, and please don't break the law. It's very important.
Okay, let's wrap up. Q, I think
Okay.
unless there's anything.
Yeah, I think we went way over the allotted time.
Yeah.
But it's a Saturday. Who doesn't like to spend their Saturday working?
Yeah. Okay. So look, the attendees, myself, Q, and Mark are available to discuss with you a source of funds and starting the process. And I'm sure if there's any questions or anything that you need a bit more clarity on, we'll be happy to help. It's a Saturday for us, but we're happy to help you because we know there's a deadline. That's why we're happy to do. So, yeah, Q, just final words, and from you, Mark, again, thanks a lot. I know you've made it to the UK and avoided that storm. So just final, words, and let's wrap this up, and we'll be in touch with all the rest of the people that are asking questions, and we can have that conversation. Q, any final remarks?
Just thank you for your time. Thank you for making time on a Saturday to come here. Please contact us with any questions that you have. We are here every time before deadlines. We work 24/7, so please contact us with any questions. I know we didn't get to everyone, and stay tuned. We are going to make more of these webinars where we talk about different things that are happening in the industry. And again, just contact us if you need us.
Okay, Mark?
Right. So, the only thing I would say is this, don't let anyone push you into filing an EB5 now, right? Don't let anyone do that. But if you do want to be certain of filing EB5 at $500,000, you really have to act now. If you want to be certain of it, that's what my advice was. Don't be pushed or bamboozled into this if you don't really want to do it. But if you really know you want to do it and you really want to be at $500,000, then take up this opportunity to speak to myself or Q or whatever today, and we can go through it, or choose another law firm. If you don't like me, fair enough, but choose another law firm and just get started on that source of funds. And for persons from those countries, the sort of transfer of funds issues, and start it today.
Right. And if you don't like me,
hold on, Q.
Choose another project, but just move on. I don't like it.
For our attendees that are in places like Afghanistan or Ukraine, there's a lot of political uncertainty. Make sure you find, okay, because Mark, we've had that situation where we've advised them, and then they get into a whole mess, and it has a big impact on their livelihood. So those people, whatever process, if you're happy to pay the higher amount, whatever as this, but I would advise you to act on this now, because especially if your circumstances are very complex.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Brilliant.
And the sooner you're in, the sooner that time passes. I had an investor who I contacted him, like, we got in touch 3 years ago, and then after 3 years he did it. He goes like, I'm sure now. And then he was complaining about the wait time. You would have been in the US by now, So if you know you're going to do EB5, just do your homework and do it.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Q.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.